Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're well. Welcome to another Business Builder webinar. For those of you who don't know, I'm Mark Lawson and I run a firm of accountants in Plymouth called Business Vision, and we specialise in helping small and medium businesses grow their profits, cash flow, and spend less time doing it. So it's a fair bit to get through today. The subject today is why newsletters still work, how to create great newsletters and gain clients. So this is all about growing the sales side. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of what we're doing, I just wanted to run through a brief story that some of you may have come across before, but it's always worth going through again. And it's about the acres of diamonds. This is a story about a farmer in South Africa in the 19th century. And at that time, there was an abundance of diamonds being discovered, and there was a bit of an equivalent of the American gold rush going on. And this farmer got excited about the prospect of earning wealth and fortune by going to look for diamonds compared to his farming profits. So he sold up his farm and decided to use that money to head out and travel to the diamond line. He then wandered all over the African continent in search of diamonds and wealth, and gradually as the years slipped by, he never found anything, and eventually he was completely broke and committed suicide, threw himself into a river. The person who he'd sold the farm to a few years earlier picked up an unusual looking rock that was lying around the farm, and because it looked unusual, he thought he'd put it on display on the top of his mantelpiece above the fire. And several months later, a visitor popped by, and when he saw the rock on the mantelpiece, he went into complete shock and convulsions. And he told the new owner of the farm that the funny-looking rock on the mantelpiece was about the biggest diamond that he'd ever seen. And the new owner of the farm said, "I don't know what you're talking about. The whole farm's covered with them." And sure enough, it was. The farm was actually completely covered with diamonds, and it eventually turned out to be what is now the Kimberley diamond mine, the richest diamond mine the world's ever known. So unfortunately, the original farmer who sold up and went looking was already standing on acres of diamonds in his own farm. So clearly the moral is that each of us, each of our own businesses, is technically in the middle of our own acres of diamond from a marketing point of view. We need to develop the stuff that we've already got. We need to move forward with things that we already know, rather than continuously looking for the next new thing and some magic wand. Marketing and sales has been around so many centuries now that there is very little new, even with latest technology. And clearly newsletters is going to be one of those things that has been around many, many years and therefore not particularly seen as overly exciting. But we'll go through lots of practical ideas and hopefully give you some insights as to what we can do. So newsletters for today at least is what I would consider to be our new acres of diamond and the new thing that we've now found within our business, and we need to move that forward. To start with, I just want to go through some of the benefits and the reason why you might want to be looking at newsletters in a new light. Firstly, it does enhance the reputation of the business. It's a good way to get information out. It's a constant reminder to the people you're sending it to that you're out there, what you do, that you exist. It's a lot more tangible than a lot of marketing stuff, particularly emails, which we'll talk about a bit later, which are probably the most intangible marketing around, easily deletable, very rarely read. So it's a very tangible, touchy-feely thing, and great newsletters even more so. For that reason, they can be longer lasting than most marketing stuff. It tends to be sat on people's desks. It tends to be looked at over a period of time. So it can be a useful resource to the people that you want to impress, the people that you're looking to get as new clients. And although there are obviously cheaper methods of marketing, particularly email, it is still a relatively cheap way of marketing. Printing costs these days are very, very low, can even be done in-house with a decent colour printer much of the time. So it's not as expensive as you might think, and we'll go through how you can make some money with it. It's also a good way of keeping in contact with customers. So customer contact is a prime issue. We don't want to be gaining loads of new customers and losing ones out the back door. So it's a good way of keeping in touch with customers. It's also a good way of bringing back lost customers because they might see this and think, oh yes, there were reasons why I did business with you back then. I need to make contact again. Primarily, I would imagine most people see it as a way of getting new customers, and it certainly works from that point of view. A good newsletter can add a huge amount of value to the reader, unlike many bits of marketing, so it can be hugely valuable. It can inform and educate the reader, and it can also generate referrals. So referral schemes are a great way of marketing. Combine that with a newsletter can work very well. So from a marketing point of view, the aim with newsletters, as with all marketing campaigns and materials, is ROI, a return on investment. In simple terms, the money you spend out has to be exceeded by the money that comes in. Not by a little bit, but certainly a multiple, 2, 3, 4, 10 times as much should come back in as goes out. And that's an ROI, it's an investment. You choose to do marketing, therefore why choose to do it if it doesn't bring more back than goes out? From a newsletter point of view, it's not necessarily going to be the case that there is a direct link between somebody getting a newsletter and money immediately falling into your bank account. It can be part of a sales pipeline where the contact, the marketing tool is designed to do something different than just get immediate money. It might be to get them to do the next step. So for us, it might go to potential clients who then make the decision to contact us, maybe pick up one of the offers in the newsletter. That gets them into a meeting or to receive some further information, and it gradually moves them down the pipeline to eventually be a customer or eventually pay money. Now, that still needs to be measured. Even though it's part of a sales pipeline and not directly going to get you money, you will have, if you've listened to previous webinars and been to seminars, you'll know that all the measurements of that sales pipeline need to be recorded. So in that instance, you would be measuring whether the target effect of the newsletter is actually achieved, i.e. does it move enough people from point A to point B and therefore further down the sales funnel. And that would be the marketing aim. What it isn't, and I don't think any marketing stuff should be for small and medium businesses, it's not branding and it's certainly not market awareness in isolation. It might achieve that job as well, but I believe small and medium businesses should use marketing for a simple sole purpose, which is to go out there and to get money. To bring money into the business, to bring sales into the business. If you're a big PLC, then brand awareness, market share, all very important, but it doesn't apply anywhere near in as much detail for a small business. So we need to be basically doing very direct, grab money and keep doing that. So if you've got newsletters and you're going, it's printed by a printer, it looks fantastic, it doesn't really do anything other than get us out there and make people aware, then hopefully we can come up with a lot of ideas today that will move that into a different arena for you. And some of you may well have tried newsletters before and go, well, tried that, it doesn't work. And I understand that feeling if that's the case, or you may not have tried it before but feel that you wouldn't want to because it probably wouldn't work if you did it. Well, there are several reasons why it might not work, and I've listed a few of them on the screen there. One is that a lot of people, when they do marketing campaigns, don't actually measure the effectiveness of it. They don't measure the return on investment. So it may well be that it does work financially, but nobody knows. And therefore, because it's not sexy or something new comes along, they don't keep moving forward with newsletters or don't pick up newsletters. The other issue, which is certainly more likely to be the case, is that the newsletter itself may not be a good marketing piece. It may not work from a marketing point of view. It may be great as a newsletter, i.e. it looks fantastic, it's glossy, etc. But there are things that need to be done from a marketing point of view, and this afternoon we'll go through most of those so that you have the knowledge to create a great newsletter that works from a marketing point of view. So it may well be, like all marketing, that you've tried the subject matter but not in a way that works. And with all areas of marketing and business generally, we shouldn't just try one thing once and then give up because it doesn't work. It's about learning and moving forward until we do get it to work. And the other thing with newsletters is a lot of newsletters are not written with "it's all about them, not about you" in mind. It can be a very dry, inwardly focusing article or newsletter, and that is certainly not what's going to work from a marketing point of view, whether it's newsletters or anything. So it may well be that the focus of the newsletter just simply wasn't going to inspire anything in the person that it was intended to reach. Okay, so with that sort of backdrop in mind, let's just look at what should go into a great newsletter. So what's going to be the content? And this may seem a little bit odd because people go, I know what goes in a newsletter, there's a bit of typing, there's a few photos and stuff like that, but there are actually many rules, and one of the benefits of newsletters is that they've been around for so long that most people who do marketing and who study marketing and have tried things will have measured in great detail exactly what each variation in a newsletter achieves. So there's a huge amount of knowledge about what will work. There are rules. And because we know the rules, we can start to give you an idea of how that's going to fit into a newsletter campaign. And graphic design is certainly important. The visual aspect of it is important. So graphic design is important, but that on its own is not what it's about. Style won't actually get you the sales. It won't get you the ROI. There's a lot of emotional, subconscious things going on when people read or decide not to read newsletters. So the content will have that in mind as well. And although some of it may seem slightly odd, slightly weird, and even questionable, I can guarantee that everything we're going to go through this afternoon has been fully researched by people who know these things, who've tested them for decades. Thousands and millions of newsletters going out with slight changes. So if you do find yourself being a bit skeptical, I would strongly ask you to do some further reading on that particular point, and you will find that there is some good, solid background research to support every single thing. Okay, first thing, again, some of these will be fairly obvious, but we need to look at the method as well as the actual thing. The first thing is the name and the tagline. So there needs to be a name at the top of the newsletter. It needs to be called something. And probably what a lot of newsletters don't have is a little tagline underneath. Let's give you an illustration of what that would look like. So, for example, if we were doing a marketing newsletter, the name of it might be Low Cost Marketing. The tagline underneath would be Proven Cost-Effective Marketing Tips for Startup Businesses. Now, what you'll find with a lot of newsletters is the name of the newsletter has no marketing potential. It has no value. And therefore, given that it's at the very top and probably one of the first things people look at, it doesn't achieve anything. So the name of your business at the top won't achieve anything. So ABC Limited Newsletter doesn't actually do anything, certainly not for the reader. It might boost some egos within the business. So the name itself needs to convey some marketing value, and then underneath that there's a lot of extra information in the tagline. So it's going to say what do you get out of this newsletter, who's it for, and what will you get by reading it. And all of that in the example I've given you there can be achieved with just 2 lines, and that will clearly then tell people reading it whether it's something that they would be interested in. Whereas ABC Limited Newsletter will not convey any information, and they may well just give up. So that's the headline and tagline. Usually, as a rule, the tagline would be in italics. It would be obviously in lower font size than the main headline, but it would probably be a bigger font size than the normal text within the rest of the newsletter. Next thing, each section in the newsletter would have a headline. So this is partly to do with readability and the visual aspect, but it's all about getting people to not just read the front page, but it's about reading other bits as well. So each section in the newsletter, that might be each page of a 4-page newsletter. It could even be half a page if it's got 2 different bits in it. Each of those areas would have its own headline so that people know what it is and what it gets dragged into. And again, you'll find that within newspapers. You know, in order for newspapers to be readable, they don't just have the name of the newspaper and a headline on the front page and then 60 pages of very small font with nothing breaking it up. So headlines for each section, and then drop capitals work very well. For those of you who haven't come across that, that's an example of a drop capital. It's a big letter, the first letter of the first word, but it's basically far bigger size, and it lines up with some of the lines in the actual text. Now, the reason for that is fairly obvious, is that it pulls people in, it makes it more readable. So instead of being faced with a big block of text that we have to sort of dive into, that big D would suck us in to then looking at the first few words, and then before we know it, we're reading on. So that is proven to encourage people to read more than they otherwise might. So drop capitals work better than no drop capitals. So use those at the beginning of each section of the newsletter as well. Again, headshot, so a picture of the business owner or the author, just a professionally carried out photo of the managing director or partner, a smiling professional photo, in an ideal world taken by a professional photographer, not just on their phone, and then dropped in. That always works. It works for several reasons. One is it makes the newsletter a lot friendlier. It also makes it a lot more interesting as well, and it would also obviously add things like awareness and familiarity comes into that. So a headshot, usually on the front page of the business owner. Captions, so this would be where you're putting in photos or graphs or illustrations. That would be a line or 2 of text under each of those. So don't just put a photo in and slot it in somewhere to break up the text, which is a good thing to do, but actually put a couple of lines underneath the photo as well. And research has shown where that happens, it will be read by 4 times as many people as where it doesn't. So a lot of these things will be surprising in terms of the effectiveness of it, but captions under photos means that 4 times as many people will read that bit of the newsletter. And then editorial, so that would normally be something about the business, something again friendly, familiar, not overly technical, but something useful, and particularly bearing in mind it's got to have something that's what's in it for the person reading. So this isn't an inwardly focused thing, it's about maybe what the business is doing to help certain types of people, successes, those sort of things. So an editorial, it wouldn't take up a huge amount of space, but certainly you want that in the newsletter as well. The masthead, which is basically a bit which you'll see in newspapers and good newsletters, usually on the front page, on the side, maybe about halfway down. Sometimes it's at the top of the newsletter under the headline and the tagline. And that's just details about you and the newsletter. So it would often just contain, in relatively small detail, the name of the newsletter and a tagline for the newsletter again, contact details, brief description of what you do, what your services are, maybe a copyright notice to say that the information in the newsletter is copyrighted, because if it's that useful and valuable, it may well find itself into other areas where it shouldn't. And I think I would recommend that it would also show a price. Even though you would always give the newsletter away free, it doesn't do any harm to put a price on it so that people perceive that there is value before they get into the nitty-gritty detail of reading it. So I think if you had a newsletter that says £29 plus VAT on it, as opposed to one that says free or says nothing, that again will perform better because it persuades people that there is value. You might go, well, that seems a very basic, simple thing to persuade people, but again, psychologically, lots of little things do make difference in marketing. And the masthead will typically be in its own section, maybe bordered or shaded in a light shade of colour or grey, just to highlight it. There's also the deck, which is basically an introductory line above the article to draw people in. Photos, clip arts and cartoons would obviously be in there. That breaks it up as well. And a pull quote. So a pull quote is basically something that sits in its own section within the text, again to drag people in, to get them to read something. Just showing an example of how that might look in a newsletter. So that little bit in the middle there is called a pull quote, and that would sit in different places within the text, sometimes in a border, maybe not, but it would be something that relates to the area of text that it's within. But again, it's easier to read, it breaks things up, and it needs to be of sufficient interest that people will then, having looked at that first, which they often will, then dive into the actual article itself, where a bit more marketing can be carried out. Other things you'd have in there, folio. So folio in newsletter terms is basically what you might call the footer. It's the bit at the bottom. So there would need to be a bit at the bottom, usually segregated by a line. Underneath that might be contact details again, so the name of the newsletter, the name of the business, address, website, phone numbers, etc., things like that. There should be lines, borders throughout. Again, graphically, that's quite important to just break things up, not make it too cumbersome or all-encompassing to read through, not too boring. Logo, certainly, if you've got a logo, that can go in there as well. Date and issue number. So, it could be the newsletter for July 2017, issue number 6. That can go in there. That implies that it's part of a series. It will get people wanting to know more, have the next ones, make sure they're on the mailing list, and so on. And often content, so people can actually see what's in there and maybe pick out the bits that might be more useful or relevant to them first, so that they actually are doing something with the newsletter, rather than looking at the first article, deciding that that's not of any interest, and then not looking for anything else. So all of those things will be on there. From there, the next stage then would be to get the newsletter read. So we've got a great looking newsletter, we've got the right things in it, and we've got some very useful articles going on, and we think that people will find that really interesting. So how do we actually get them to read it? Well, crucially, and this may be an area where I think people might fall down with newsletters, there is a temptation to have an electronic newsletter that is emailed out. Reason for that is it's a lot easier to create, it's a lot cheaper to send, and it can go out to a far bigger number of people. The problem with that is that statistically the number of newsletters that actually achieve even getting opened is minute. Getting people to actually read it, given that there's no touchy-feely stuff going on, it's not like actually reading something and holding it. It doesn't work anywhere near as well. So I would always strongly recommend that goes out in the post. If it goes out in the post, then there should be a note on the envelope to say what's inside, because people might receive something in an envelope and think it's junk mail. So if it said on the envelope, inside is your latest XYZ newsletter, maybe a little bit of information to get them excited about it. Another way to achieve that is to actually send it in a see-through envelope or some sort of sealed wrapping, so that they can immediately see what's in there and open it up. And a great marketing guy, probably the best and most acknowledged marketing guru of present time, is a guy called Dan Kennedy, who works in the States. And if you ever get a chance from a marketing point of view to read any of his books, they are very, very practical, and he generally doesn't tend to go out to see people. They go to see him. He charges an absolute arm and a leg, and he has a newsletter for his whole business, which is huge, called GKIC, and that actually goes out with a few extras thrown in, so you can see that there's some little extra bits of gifts with the newsletter, but that's all done in a see-through envelope, with a great sticker on the front that looks almost like a seal, telling you exactly what's there. So it makes it look important. It makes it look like you want to be opening and reading it. And I say, if he's one of the best marketing people around, then I would certainly be copying what he does. The envelope, and this should go without saying, but it's amazing how many people still don't stamp envelopes that are used for marketing. There needs to be a stamp on it, not franked. Franking doesn't imply personable information coming through. It implies something informal and probably not something that wants to be read. So stamp. Even with stamps, if you have the ability, if you've got the numbers to play around with, it's always worth testing just how the stamps work. There has been research that shows 2 stamps might work a lot better than 1. There's also research that shows that stamps slightly placed, not in a line, so slightly crooked, they work even better. So if you've got large data samples that you can play around with and see how things work, then by all means play around with that. But certainly there is no doubt that stamping an envelope works far better than franking it. Make sure, and again, this is something that shouldn't need to be said, but it's important enough to go in here. The name of the recipient needs to be correct. It needs to be spelt correctly. It needs to be not vague. So it shouldn't be "Dear Homeowner" or anything like that on the front of the envelope. It's got to be the name. If you know the full name, make sure the Christian name's in there as well, and so on. So it's got to be spelt right. It's got to be names rather than "Dear Sir" or "Dear Homeowner" or whatever, "Dear Reader." That isn't going to imply any personable approach, and far less likely to get opened, which is the first stage, is to get them to receive it and actually open the envelope. Next bit about getting it read, which is really marketing rules that apply to most marketing things, but again worth mentioning at this stage. Great headlines in the newsletter. Everybody knows that the first thing that's going to get read is the headline or headlines, so they've got to be good, interesting, and intriguing enough that basically people decide to move forward. There is an art to great headlines, and if you are creating headlines or getting somebody else to create them for you, we'll always be happy to critique those. And if you're struggling, we have some great software that can pull together good headlines. The problem with good headlines, I think, is that people try to invent something completely new that's never been read before. The reality is that we know what a good headline is because there's been decades and decades of research on headlines, with measurements that come out of your ears as to which ones get read. So there is a huge amount of research that will tell you exactly what a good headline should contain, and you could even just pinch a great headline and tweak it very slightly. It's probably going to work fantastically well. And many of those great headlines, you can read books on headlines alone and just see which ones work fantastically well in the past. They will surprise you at how ordinary they are, but they've got the right things in there. It doesn't need to be clever. Next one is intriguing pull quotes. So we mentioned pull quotes before, which is those little boxes in the text with some sort of quote or narrative about generally the context of where it is. If that can basically really intrigue people and get them wondering what it means or what it leads to, then that's going to get them reading the article. If you had, let's say, a little pull quote in there that says, "I was attacked by 16 grizzly bears and survived," then you're going to read that article in more detail, I would imagine. Or if it says, "I managed to get 600 new clients with £10," That's the sort of thing. It's obviously got to be true and real. People these days won't want to read 8 pages of complete text. They'll want to see some lightness in there. 2 to 3 minimum entry points. And what that means is basically that there are several places within the newsletter that they could start from. So one entry point would just be headline and then 4 pages of very small font text. There's only one place to start there, and only having one entry point means that they may well decide that they're not going to enter the newsletter. 2 to 3 minimum means that they can basically start in different places. They can start where they want to, what grabs their interest. They can start there, and once they're in, there's a better chance that they'll do more and read more. So that can be graphics as well. It can be headlines, it can be graphics. The drop cap works well in terms of being an entry point as well. People know that there's a starting point there. Something of note on the back page. So research shows that 15% of readers start on the back page. 85% start on the front. Weirdly enough, 15 out of every 100 readers start on the back page. So if they're going to do that, then you need something of interest on the back page as well. Interesting content goes without saying. I've already mentioned that it needs to be what's in it for them. It's got to interest the reader. It can't be all about you and something that only you would find interesting. If only you and your children will read it, then it's not going to do the job. So interesting content, and a good target to aim for is about 90% of the newsletter to be totally relevant and interesting. So a little bit that might be about you, about your contact details, but 90% relevant and interesting to the target audience that you're trying to get to read it. Other content that would be really useful, case studies and success stories work very well. So again, how people overcame problems. So if it was myself, a case study of some consultancy we did that led to a business making a lot more profit or being able to retire early would be really interesting. People would want to read about other people in business, how they overcome the normal stresses of being in business life. How-tos, so how to actually do things. So a newsletter that says this is how you create great newsletters would be readable for people who are interested in marketing. How to actually do work on your car to save money would be interesting for people in that particular area. So how-tos, how to achieve something, how to do something would work. Reports about something would work. Unusual facts can be very readable. On our newsletter, on the back page, I think it's on the top left, there is a little section, probably about half the height of the page, that just says odd facts about life. It's completely irrelevant to accountancy, completely irrelevant to marketing, but it will get read because they are unusual facts about life that people just find completely weird and would never believe it. And that will get read. And once they read that, there's a great chance that they'll read other stuff. Technical advice, if you're going to give technical advice, a great way to do that is a Q&A thing. So even if you're making up the Qs, the questions to get the answers in, that will be far more readable, either whether it's on a newsletter or a website. So Q&A stuff would be great. And probably more important from a marketing point of view is offer of the month. So if you did want to move people forward in a pipeline, one way to do that would be to have some sort of offer of the month that only people in the newsletter might be able to achieve, and you could do that by maybe including a coupon or some sort of code that they need to quote, and that would be only available to them, and that might be something where they actually do pay money for that offer, or it could be designed to get them to do the next thing, which is a freebie, which then moves them gradually down the pipeline. So offers work well. If you're going to put an offer in, it goes without saying that there has to be great call to action. So it has to tell them exactly what to do in order to trigger that offer and give them as many different ways of doing that as possible. So, not little small print with an email. There needs to be big print, email, phone number, etc., so that they have no problems in finding out what the next step is. Most people get diverted very quickly. If they think it's going to be trouble trying to find out how to do the next step, they won't bother. Human interest about the owner and the business. As I say, internally focused things generally need to be interesting and not dry. So you can certainly write about the business and about the owner, but it needs to be a human interest story, something that's going to be of interest to an outside reader, not just somebody who the business owner knows very well. Quizzes always work very well. Trivia can be in there as well. Freebies, as I mentioned just now, freebies to send away for they move the relationship forward a little bit to the next stage. Coming attractions, so for us, we would always want to be putting in newsletters details of the next webinars and seminars that are coming up. And also, no reason why you can't put in this month's newsletter what's going to be appearing in next month's newsletter, so that people don't cancel subscriptions or decide not to bother reading it next time. Keep their interest on the go. So let's just look at, before we get to the sort of end stages, what I call importance. There is a technical phrase which is called the pyramid of importance within newsletter marketing, and it's really which things are the most important from a reader's point of view, and therefore are most important from your point of view from marketing. And there's two key areas of importance. There's the pages, and then there's the actual things in the pages. So if I move on to those, it will probably become clearer what I mean. So in terms of the importance of pages, it probably goes without saying that the front page is the most important. That's where 85% of people go to start with. So the front page, if you're going to divert time, effort, front page is the most important. Second most important page is the back page. Third most important is any right-hand page. And then fourth most important area is the top of the page. So that's where you sort of need to be aiming in terms of placing stuff and prioritizing stuff. And as a side issue, that works exactly the same in terms of putting adverts in magazines or newspapers. So if you're going to be putting stuff in newspapers or magazines, you'd want it on the right-hand page in preference to a left-hand page. You'd want it on the front page in preference to the middle. And newspapers and magazines know that usually, and they will charge accordingly. But if you think, oh, that page is very cheap, it's usually for a reason, is it doesn't get looked at, it's not as important to the reader, therefore it won't achieve as much. And then importance in terms of things that are within the newsletter. These are the most important from a marketing point of view that research has shown. Number one, photos and graphics. They need to be there. They are the most important thing because they're most likely to get looked at before anything else. Next most important is the captions. And surprisingly, third most important is the headlines. So those three things, certainly you need to concentrate on those. You need to test whether the captions are the right captions and so on. Fourth is the text that we talked about earlier. Fifth is the pull quotes. And then sixth is subheadings. And you'll see there that I've got the 6 most important areas in a newsletter. Nowhere within there is the actual little bits of text that make up the large body of the newsletter. In terms of marketing, that will not be the most important in terms of achieving what you want from it. A couple of other points, just bits and pieces and rules about newsletters that may help you make it the perfect one. In an ideal world, and hopefully if you get printers to do the design, they'll be doing this for you, is a consistent typeface. So same fonts, they might be different size, but generally all the text in the columns apart from the drop cap and maybe the pull quotes would be the same typeface and probably the same size. You want good alignment. You want everything to line up and look neat and tidy and encourage people to get into there. If they see a baffling array of different bits all scattered all over the place, it will put them off. Don't reduce the type size of the headline. So what sometimes happens when people do their own newsletter, or even printers sometimes, is they have a great headline, and because it's so big, it has to actually go onto 2 lines. I would never ever do that. I would actually change the wording of the headline to fit. So don't reduce the font size, don't push it onto 2 lines, make the headline fit the right size in the right location by rewording the headline if necessary. As always, get somebody to proofread. It surprises me how little time is spent actually reviewing everything once it's done. And that happens quite a bit with printers without wishing to do them any disservice. I've dealt with printers a number of times, and I've had quite a large percentage of typing problems where you wouldn't expect it. So clearly printers aren't proofreading. So even if you're getting it done by a printer, still proofread it. If you're doing it internally, definitely get it proofread by at least one other person. Send them monthly. Newsletters need to be monthly. Any longer than that and the interest dwindles. Any more frequently if it's posted, again, bit overkill. Typically 2 to 8 pages. So when we're talking about the cost of newsletters, there's nothing stopping you doing a 2-page newsletter back and front on A4 to start with. That isn't going to take a huge amount of time. It's certainly not going to take up a huge amount of cost, paper-wise or postage-wise. So anywhere between 2 and 8 pages is the optimum. Free, always newsletters free, but as I mentioned earlier, priced somewhere on there to say that it is technically going to cost some money and therefore it has value. In an ideal world, no outside ads. A lot of people do put other people's ads in to obviously keep the cost down. Trouble with that is it then becomes less of what it's supposed to be and a little bit more like just an advertising thing, which people are far less likely to read. So no outside ads. If you have to have ads in there because of the cost of it, then I would find things that are absolutely in line with what the newsletter is doing. So if I was doing a marketing newsletter, I'd want some ad from somebody who's going to be providing some sort of marketing tool or software or something like that to complement the message. But in an ideal world, don't have outside ads, just sell your own business and what you want to achieve. Use special editions, so you might have a monthly newsletter. From time to time you can do a special edition that might have some special offer in it or special news. No problem with that at all. And actually special editions will often get read more than the main newsletter. Cover letter, so when you do send out the newsletters, often get asked, should there be a letter with each of them? I don't think you need to, but I would always send one out with the very first issue, introducing it, telling them what's it about, what's going to be in there, what the aim is, and what's going to be exciting about it. And I'll tell you towards the end how you can get your hands on an example of that cover letter. A good idea is to actually hole punch the newsletter. For longevity, if you hole punch it, there's going to be a few people who will then think, oh, I'll save all these up. They might have OCD and they'll have little folders where they put years worth of your newsletters in there and just save them. So the longer the newsletters are floating around, the better. So a hole punch in there, and you could even add coupons as well. So you could put coupons in there. They're always very useful. Depending on the budget, etc., you could even offer a newsletter binder with obviously your name and details on the spine. So if they're really valuable newsletters, if they've got good information in there, you can do that. And I know Dan Kennedy, I mentioned earlier, definitely does that because his marketing newsletters are designed to be kept and reviewed on a regular basis by all small businesses. So we've got the newsletter, we've got all great stuff in it, and we know that it's going to get read more than most newsletters will. So where does it go? Not great surprises here. Customers, so certainly send it out to existing customers because that's a great way of cross-selling or upselling existing services to people who aren't presently buying it. Leads, potential clients it can go to. Referrers of leads, so if you typically have people that generally refer to you, so if you're a building contractor, it may well be that architects tend to give you business. Well, send them copies of the newsletter as well. Members of your team and any contacts of any of those first 4 headings. So if you send it to your team, see if they can know anybody else that might want it. May even be a bit in the newsletter saying if you want somebody else to get it, send their details here. That just increases your readership. Fine, so hopefully we've covered a lot of areas about newsletters, and if you had any skepticism about the power of newsletters, I'm hoping that I've given you some information and knowledge that might convert you into looking at newsletters. If you're already doing them, then hopefully you've got a lot of practical, pragmatic ways of improving how that newsletter will work. As with all marketing, you've got to spend some time on this stuff. You can't just whip up a quick newsletter and expect it to work brilliantly. in the same way that you can't whip up a quick advert and expect it to work brilliantly. You can't whip up a quick Yellow Pages ad. It's got to have time spent on it because it has to conform to all the rules of marketing and the psychology of it as well. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and I would recommend you use that, apply it, and by all means contact me if you get difficulties or have questions, and let me know how you get on as well. I'd be really interested to see what you do, and if you do send out newsletters, absolutely put me on your mailing list. I'd love to receive them and have a look through. So what's next? If you want an illustration, and I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying that Ars Newsletters is one of the best out there, but it certainly conforms to many of the rules. If you want a copy of our newsletter, if you're not already getting it, then I'll give you some contact details in a minute. You can request that and be sent that on a regular basis. If you want an example of a letter that would go out with a first issue, I can give you a template for that as well. Again, contact details will come up in a sec. We have the next webinar, which is on the 19th of October. And that's about costly mistakes, which may not sound the most sexy subject ever, but I would highly recommend it. It's about systems and about creating systems and methods within a business that would avoid people doing things the wrong way. And if I ever come across a consistent complaint in business, is that people hire other people and then say they never do what I want them to do. Well, this is about how to avoid all of that. Common sense says that if you do one mistake or do something wrong, that's just human nature. To do it 2 or 3 times is stupid. So we will be looking at that in the next webinar. Next seminar, some of you may be going to our seminars, the BBFs that we do in Plymouth. Next one of those is on the 21st of September, which is all about saving time and money with the Xero cloud bookkeeping software. And that's designed both for people who are already using Xero, who want to know a lot more about how to use it better, and those who've heard about it or haven't heard about it and want to start looking at what it might do within their business. So you will all get invites for those in due course, but if you want to know more quicker, again, contact details are here. So any of those will work. If you want to email Wendy with any questions or information that I've promised, if you want that, just email her. Or you can go onto the website. There's a lot of good free stuff on there as well, and also ways of contacting us, or simply ring in on Plymouth 752210 and we'll get everything you need to you. So hope you found that interesting and rewarding. Hope you do some work with newsletters, and as I said before, keep in touch with us. Let us know how you get on. Let us know if you need any further help with it. So thank you for attending today. Thanks for your interest in this, and hope to speak to you soon. But for now, have a good afternoon and speak soon. Cheers.